We made it just in time, literally today. The Chiefs, the Thursday opener. Welcome back to football season, everybody, and welcome to the final deep dive in this deep dive series today. Before we do get started with the Chiefs, I do want to just say thank you to all of you, number one, for watching, for interacting, for sharing the videos on social media, for commenting, for liking the videos, all of it helping make this the best deep dive series to date. And thank you as well for your patience. It's not my goal to push this video right up to the day where the season literally starts. I put it upon myself to get this series done despite taking a 2-week Euro vacation with my wife and moving cross country to Charlotte, taking a series that I normally get about 4 months to get done and crunching that into about 3 months. It's been a grind to get this thing done, but if not for you guys and your passion for this series, it really wouldn't have been possible. And I've thought about cutting corners at times to get this thing done, but seeing how much you guys care about this series just as much as I do gives me that extra drive to get this thing done. So today is obviously a deep dive into the Chiefs, but it's also a celebration of an awesome summer and the arrival of football season. So let's have some fun here today talking about the Kansas City Chiefs, yet again coming into the season as the number one ranked team. But that's not to say that this team is a lock to get that three-peat and that there aren't some questions about this team that are going to need to be answered if they're going to ultimately win the Super Bowl again. So one more time here, hit that like button before we get started and make sure you're subscribed. I am this afternoon actually going to have another shorter video up, my full predictions show, where I'm kind of officially planting my flag on where I think these teams ultimately end up record-wise. Super Bowl predictions, awards show, all that. And then content's going to slow down a little bit here. I'm going to take some time to recover. I'm going to work on the Madden roster, which a lot of you guys have been asking about. But you can definitely still expect my Tuesday Power Rankings show, my Week 1 breakdown on the Fully Inflated Football podcast. So make sure you're following that. And then, by the way, Fridays, my goal is to every week either have a tier maker positional breakdown video or do like a film-based, video essay type of deal as we've done in the past. So that's the plan. We'll see where I'm at next week. Have definitely hit a little burnout here with this series. So, if I'm feeling it, I'll get it done Friday. Otherwise, I might take some personal time off next week. We'll see, though. Anyway, Chiefs fans, I know you are chomping at the bit. You've waited this entire series for this episode. So let's go ahead and get started. As always, taking a look at the team's offseason, and the Chiefs were pretty damn quiet. As you look at their offseason changes, the coaching staff staying neutral, no major changes there. At quarterback, they're going to flip backups, Blaine Gabbert for Carson Wentz. Do we see a little Carson Wentz Week 18 revival project here? Maybe, maybe not, but keeping that as neutral at quarterback. At running back, Jerick McKinnon, not with the team currently, though he definitely feels like one of those guys that they could easily pick up come playoff time. They like him as their little secret weapon out of the backfield, but they do bring in Samaje Perine from Denver. Not much of note there. I'm going to say neutral at running back. With the tight end room, likewise, neutral. They lose tight end 3, Blake Bell, and bring in a developmental athlete, Jared Wiley, in the 4th round. And they go get Peyton Hendershot to take Blake Bell's job from Dallas. I'm going to say neutral at tight end. At wide receiver, definitely upgraded. This was their main focus this offseason. They've said enough of this dink and dunk bull crap. We're going to open up this offense. They bring in Hollywood Brown in free agency and then double down with the speed, drafting Xavier Worthy in the 1st round. They also were able to get Juju Smith-Schuster back, who was this team's top wide receiver a couple years ago. We'll see what his health looks like, but you compare that to the losses of Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Kadarius Toney, who was a disaster here, and Richie James. And that's definitely upgraded with the potential to be massively upgraded depending what they get from Brown and Worthy. And then on the offensive line, I will say slightly downgraded. They do lose Donovan Smith, who had his ups and downs, but was still a baseline starter as a veteran left tackle. And Nick Allegretti has some very critical offensive line depth no longer with the team. He signs to be a starter in Washington. Their additions are all rookies. Kingsley Suamataia in the second round, Hunter Nauerzad, one of my guys, in the fifth round out of Penn State, and C.J. Hansen. Obviously, some very unproven NFL talent there. I'm going to just say slightly downgraded. You're not too worried about it because it's not like Donovan Smith was that good for them, but even to get back to what Smith gave them is going to be at least to be determined from those dudes. And then pretty much nothing going on the defense other than the loss of L'Jarius Sneed. We'll get there, but with the front, the interior of the defensive line, flipping backups, Matt Dickerson for Marlon Tuipulotu on the edge. No losses, though, just like last year, they're going to be without Charles Omeni, who to start the year. He was suspended last year, and this year coming off the ACL injury. So compared to last year's team, pretty similar, just different reasons. They did bring in Cameron Thomas, nice player, but not enough for me to say upgraded to any degree. At linebacker, they do lose Willie Gay. For many teams, that would be a loss, but they are insanely deep at linebacker. They retained Drew Tranquill, and as many of you know, I'm a big Leo Chanel guy, so I'm not too worried about that loss, even if Willie Gay can play a little bit. But then, at cornerback, this is going to be the big downgrade that this team did make. L'Jarius Sneed, a stud number one corner, goes to Tennessee. They couldn't quite fit him in under the books. This is why it's so hard to sustain back-to-back championships. It was a miracle they did it last year. Another obstacle here, losing, a top 10 corner or so, essentially through free agency. They tagged him and then traded him. But then at safety, staying neutral, Mike Edwards out, Jaden Hicks in, fourth-round pick. Edwards was kind of a dime safety / quasi-starter. Was okay, but I'm not really worried about that loss. And then special teams, to be determined. Tommy Townsend, a solid punter for them, leaves. They bring in punt god Matt Ariza to round out the most controversial group of special teams unit between Matt Ariza and Harrison Butker after his offseason comments. But let's move forward and talk about this Chiefs coaching staff. I think inarguably the best overall coaching staff in the league. In our last deep dive, we talked about the Lions being number one ranked for overall coach and culture. With the Niners, I had a bit of a take saying Kyle Shanahan is my number one coach in the league. But here for the Chiefs, Andy Reid, my number two coach. An incredible culture in Kansas City. And then the cherry on top that the other teams don't have is Steve Spagnuolo, arguably now with Bill Belichick gone, the best defensive coach in the NFL, an integral part of this Chiefs dynasty that is building here. Yes, they have Reid. Yes, they have Mahomes, but without this defense last year, no way this team got a championship. We'll get to Spags and his defense, but let's talk more about Andy Reid and the offensive side of the ball, as you would expect, ranking out very highly for this series, not just for the overall coaching culture, but as the offensive guru here, their offensive coach rankings come in quite high. Tied for first for pass game coaching, a little bit lower, though, for run game coaching, a B grade, 10th to 12th. Not that they're bad in terms of coaching and scheming up the run game, but I definitely don't think of a dynamic, elite coached run game when I think of the Chiefs. In fact, they've had their struggles in that department at times. But overall, Andy Reid, still at his age, is one of the most creative, innovative offensive minds. The constant bag of tricks that they break out offensively. It's like fun and stuff, but a lot of these, motion plays or behind the back throws or shovel passes or just all the random stuff that they do is actually super effective and utilized in big moments. Like, it's the hardest part of the field to score down at the goal line or to convert these 4th and 1 situations. And between Andy Reid and Matt Nagy and Patrick Mahomes himself and these guys drawing up like have-to-have-it plays that nobody sees coming, that's definitely one of the first things that come to my mind in terms of what makes this team so special. But also, I would say, as you look throughout the entire NFL, there are really two schemes, two coaching trees at large that the vast majority of teams are following. There's some Lone Rangers out there for sure, kind of doing their own thing, but probably 26 out of 32 teams are either doing the Shanahan tree stuff with the, wide zone play action focus, or the Andy Reid focus, where it's much more of a modern pro spread offense, staying in shotgun 2x2 formations, 3x1 formations, a shotgun-oriented run game, utilizing those bubble screens and the quick passing game as an extension of the run game. This is very much like the air raid offense in pro-style format. And in terms of Andy Reid having the right concepts, coaching up those concepts to everybody involved, and pushing the right buttons at the right time, managing the game as the play caller, he's truly elite at it. And, you don't need me to sit here and tell you how great Andy Reid is. He's going to be probably a first ballot Hall of Famer at this point whenever he does decide to retire, but he's still going. And if he keeps winning, I would say he's already put himself in the sort of like Landry, Lombardi, Parcells category of who's the next best coach after Bill Belichick. But man, this team is set up to continue to win Super Bowls. If Andy Reid keeps getting 2 or 3 more rings, are we going to have to start debating him in Belichick? I don't think we're there yet, but it's not too far-fetched. He does have Matt Nagy as his offensive coordinator. I actually do think Matt Nagy at 46 years old could get back into the head coach interview discussions. It obviously didn't work in Chicago, but things have been pretty rosy here since he came back in 2022. We see guys, self-correct, learn from their mistakes, get second opportunities all the damn time. So I'd be open to the idea. But yeah, on the defensive side of the ball, we hinted at it, but Steve Spagnuolo is such an underrated aspect of this team. I actually have the Chiefs alone ranked number 1 for pass defense coaching. And for the Chiefs to have truly a head coach caliber defensive coordinator, like if Steve Spagnuolo wanted to go be a head coach, he would probably go be a top 10 head coach somewhere else. But he's done that before. He's having fun here, and he's in a place where the continuity that has existed here has reached like reached the point where it's now an elite asset for this team. It just permeates throughout every level of this team, this defense, this culture, whether that's on the field, this sort of like, memory bank of reps between him and the players within this team, where they can say, hey, remember in the 2021 AFC Championship, we got this formation, we made this check, we got an interception. Yeah, let's do that here. I think that'll work. Or how this continuity has allowed this team to draft the perfect players for Steve Spagnuolo. He has built up the perfect chemistry with the scouts and the front office within this organization so that they know the exact types of players, the skill sets at each different position that they're looking for, which has allowed them to have something like the 2021 NFL draft that they had, where they found a bunch of starters on day 3 of the draft. And then just from an overall scheming, play calling perspective, just sensational for this team. Having a coach that has literally seen it all and runs a system that can be entirely adaptable. This is, at the core, a 4-2 bump and run system. They want to get in your face. They want to blitz. They want to play man coverage. They want to be aggressive, but they're entirely multiple on the back end. 1 week, they might be cover 2 heavy. 1 week, they might be cover 3 heavy. They might be quarters heavy 1 week. And it goes much, much deeper than that. They run some crazy shit on the back end. They run coverages that you have to watch back 3, 4, 5 times to break down what the hell that was, whether it's a slot corner rotating too high or blitz in the outside corner and running quarters, just throwing curveballs at the right times. There's so many good things you could say about Steve Spagnuolo. It's been cool to see. Really last year, this was a defensive-focused team. Mahomes did his thing. The offense certainly wasn't bad, but the identity of this squad was Steve Spagnuolo's defense, and it was cool to see the national coverage of this team kind of place Steve Spagnuolo into that credit pie that is any type of dynasty like this. The most complete, the best staff in the league, and obviously don't have to ask any questions on if this team can win a Super Bowl with this staff, because they just literally did. Now, before we talk about Patrick Mahomes, I do want to thank the sponsor for today's video, Underdog Fantasy, and they have a really exciting special here tonight for this Chiefs-Ravens game. you can get your season on Underdog off to the right start with a free Travis Kelce pick. All he needs is a half a yard. You think Mahomes will throw the ball to him once? Or do you want to go against him? Do you think Roquan Smith's going to put him in a basket and tuck him away on the sideline all game? No, I wouldn't recommend that. But at Underdog Fantasy, you can be playing Pick'em for your Thursday night games, Sunday for every game, Monday matchups. It is the best way to just ramp up your interest for any given game, get the chance for huge payouts. You'll stay glued to your seat into the third, fourth quarter, waiting to see if your guys are going to get the higher on passing yards, the lower on rushing yards, whatever it might be. Highly recommend you guys check out Underdog Fantasy. And if you want to show your support for this series, for this channel, sign up using promo code TFG right now. And Underdog will also match up to $1,000 on your first deposit. They are really looking to get you set up for the 2024 NFL season and off on the right foot with that Travis Kelce special. So that's promo code TFG at Underdog Fantasy. And let's now talk about Patrick Mahomes and the quarterback room. Sounds crazy to say. I feel bad for Chiefs fans. And, I certainly don't feel bad for you guys, but I do feel bad in the sense that Mahomes just doesn't actually get the analysis at this point that every other quarterback in the league seemingly does. And from my perspective, opening up to you guys, what is there left to say? He is the clear-cut best quarterback in the league. He's still seemingly only getting better. We all know about the crazy throws, the physical talent, the play extension, the instincts, all of that, the scrambling ability where he has that rare trait where he's seemingly always faster than the guy, like just faster than the guy chasing him. If it's a 340-pound defensive tackle, he's just barely going to be outpacing him for the first down. If it's a cornerback that runs 4.3, he's still going to have just enough speed to outpace that guy for the first down. We all know about that stuff, but we saw the league basically transform their defenses to try and stop this dude. Say, well, we're going to just start playing top-down, two-shell defense, force him to complete 12 throws every drive, see if he gets bored and, loses track of his safety and throws a pick once or twice a game. And he said, well, that's fine. I'll just do that. I'll just play dink and dunk, change my play style. I'm a smart enough quarterback to have elite processing and decision making. No big deal. And now the league said, well, that didn't work, and now we're getting ran all over by everybody else. We're going to shift back to single high defenses, and the Chiefs, being the smart team they are, like, great, let's get our speed back. Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy, welcome to the building. And this year, I think we might see those fireworks come back within this offense. But you pair that explosive Mahomes with the guy he's kind of learned to be, it's just scary to think about how good this guy is. I mean, I have been on the record saying he is the best quarterback to ever play. No, he doesn't have the long-term accomplishments of Tom Brady yet, but use your eyes, people. I mean, he's just a better quarterback than Tom Brady. He's reached a similar degree of processing and decision-making and just brings way more it factor out of structure. And obviously not everybody's going to agree with that, but man, we've pretty much reached the point where a majority, even if it's 55 to 45% of people, agree with that take. So he's obviously just absurd. And I had some fun and just plugged in the ranking for QB 16, an 80 grade for this series. I plugged it in for the Chiefs just to see what that would mean for my formula that we use for the series. And that dropped the Chiefs down to the 8th ranked team, which would be the biggest drop off for any team out there. And that's just a testament for how much heavy lifting he's doing to get the Chiefs up to being the number 1 ranked team in the league. Like, as we go throughout this team, this roster here, they have great players. They have a talented roster. They would still be in the mix without him, similar to when they had Alex Smith. But there might be some comments like, I don't know, the Chiefs roster doesn't really stack up with the Niners or the Lions or the Eagles. And it's true, but neither do those teams' quarterbacks. So there's your Mahomes rundown. Nothing you haven't heard before. They did bring in Carson Wentz as a backup. I am still somewhat fascinated by Carson Wentz because I think he was so talented in his prime. Before Mahomes really existed, I thought Carson Wentz was going to be something like, well, maybe not winning 3 Super Bowls, but, one of these futures of the NFL types of quarterbacks. And then he just lost all of his confidence. He completely lost his pocket presence. The injuries added up. He's just a shell of what he used to be, but can he get some of that back and have one of these kind of Baker Mayfield-esque redemption arcs? It's a good spot to go to maybe settle back in. I'm not going to predict that happens, but wouldn't necessarily be a surprise either. And I think it's a fun landing spot for him, and could probably play pretty well on this team to kind of keep them alive if Mahomes were to miss a few weeks. So I like the addition. It's not bad. But let's talk about the weapons here. The Chiefs come in that tier that ranks 12th to 18th in the NFL with a B grade for weapons, but a lot of up arrows here. Some young players and an explosive Hollywood Brown who's kind of been a forgotten man as the Cardinals have been a bit of a joke over the last couple of years. Definitely an opportunity for redemption here. And if some of these guys prove out to be a little bit more than kind of where they're ranking at their floor heading into the season, this can go from a group that is obviously good enough for them to win a Super Bowl with, because I think it's better than what they were last year with the wide receivers. It would be hard to be worse. But this could be a group that kind of gets the Chiefs back into nightmare territory, kind of a top 8 or so group of weapons in a league loaded with great skill players. And that's just like a best case scenario, right? Where the defense doesn't have to be as great as it was last year. They can be a little bit more of a world beater type of team, get Mahomes back to the MVP podium. I do think that type of outcome for this group is in the realm of possibilities for this season. But let's go through piece by piece. But you do still have to start with Travis Kelce. Still absolutely has it at, he'll turn 35 here in November. But he's getting up there, man. And I do still put the crown on him as the best tight end in football, but I don't know if by a season's end we're necessarily going to be saying that about Kelce. I do see him slowing down on film. Not necessarily from specifically when it comes to his route running, his speed, his athletic juice. He's just not as dynamic after the catch. He's not quite as good at pulling away from fast linebackers on crossing routes and all that stuff. He does seem a good bit slower than he maybe was 3 years ago. And even last year, he had the first season in 7 years where he was under 1,000 yards. And his yards per reception dropped a whole 2 yards per catch on his career. Might not sound like much, but when you're getting 130 receptions every year and you average 12.5 to 3.5 for your entire career, and then you drop down to 10.5, that's a drop in efficiency. So the stats are there to back that up. The film is there to back it up. But what we did see last year was they kind of slowed down at the very end of the year. He rested week 18, week 17, even against the Bengals. He only had three receptions, 16 yards against Jake Browning. And it kind of felt like that late career Tim Duncan where they were like, all right, we don't really need you in the regular season. Let's just make sure you are good to go to get as much juice, as much speed, as much explosiveness and durability as possible in the playoffs when we need you. And he had arguably his 3 best games of his season in that playoff run. Hell, even in that freezing cold weather, impossible offense game, he did have some drops, but overall, 7 catches for 71 yards. But last year, they didn't have Hollywood Brown, Xavier Worthy. They didn't know what they had in Rashee Rice early in the year. They actually did have to still lean on Travis Kelce early in the season. But this year, I actually think this is a really good opportunity for the Chiefs to just cool it on Travis Kelce a little bit. Not that he won't be out there playing or can't convert big third downs or show up in big games or anything like that, but maybe, a few less plays a game where he is the designed first read. If he is, roll like I was at that game in Minnesota. He went down with like a weird, ugly looking leg injury and he went back into the game. And it's like, okay, if that happens, you don't have to rush him back out there. Like, they're in a much better spot now to just be like, don't worry about it, Travis. Like, you got nothing left to prove. Let's just continue to rack up rings here and keep you 100% for the playoffs. So I do think this year we really do see, for the first time, them going away from Travis Kelce. And I know it's a little late for fantasy advice for you guys, but he's definitely not a guy I've been targeting in fantasy football. But for a team that it feels almost like a lock to go to the playoffs, it's a very good strategy for them. And could he still be the best tight end in the NFL in January, even if he isn't in the regular season? Yes, absolutely. I would almost bet on that. So we'll kind of see how that ages. That's kind of just my expectation. And I think it's great because that means there's a ton of opportunity for these 3 young wide receivers to really step up, to really develop, prove to be this dynamic group of weapons, and develop that chemistry and trust with Mahomes too, so that you can be a little bit more of a super offense come January when you start to lean into Kelce a little bit more. And there's really reasons to be excited about all 3 of these guys. I mean, Rashee Rice in year 2, I think is going to be very, very fascinating because he had one of the weirder rookie seasons as a draft analyst to watch. Like, he just was nothing like his college projection. At SMU, he was like this kind of slower, stiffer, perimeter ball winner type that couldn't really beat press or get open as an X wide receiver. The Chiefs took him presumably to be their X because, you know, they had Kelce, they had Sky Moore, who they still had hopes for. They brought Mecole Hardman back. They had Kadarius Toney. It felt like they were pretty good in terms of slot manufactured touch guys, right? But really pretty quickly in the season, they just kind of unleashed Rashee Rice as, honestly, almost their version of Deebo Samuel, but even to a more exaggerated degree. I mean, his average depth of target, it's wild. So of 37 eligible wide receivers who played 50% of their team's snaps, Rashee Rice had the lowest average depth of target in the league by far. His average depth of target, so where he is on the field when the ball reaches him, 5 yards average depth of target. The second lowest in the league was Deebo Samuel at 7.5. And then after that is Amon-Ra St. Brown, Adam Thielen, Michael Pittman right at 8. So Rashee Rice was like leaps and bounds the shortest average depth of target in the league. And by no means did Rashee Rice answer the questions I had of him coming out of like, can he separate on the outside? Can he be an X wide receiver? He made some great catches, but you just didn't see a vertical skill set in there. But because of how SMU used him, you would have no idea that he had this Deebo Samuel-esque ability. And the Chiefs, I think, probably discovered that in the middle of camp or week 1, week 2, preseason, whenever it was. They must have seen something and were like, oh, this dude has that trait like some of those dudes that we just mentioned. I mean, literally the 3 guys that I have said this trait about, Deebo Samuel, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Michael Pittman, were in the bottom 5 for average depth of target. I've said about all those guys, and we'll say about Rashee Rice, they're just faster once the ball gets in their hands. There's that he's a football player trait about him. So the Chiefs just started throwing drags, bubbles, jet sweeps, have them just sit down on a stop route, catch the ball underneath, and go fight for difficult yards. And he was second to only Deebo Samuel in yards after the catch in the league last year. So you put him into the framework of year 2, and on this Chiefs team, that skill set will absolutely play with Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy here as more vertical options in this passing game. But is this just the beginning? Can he really start to work on his release package, his route running, and develop a little bit, at least as some bit of an intermediate ball winner like Deebo Samuel is? Back shoulder chemistry with Patrick Mahomes, run dig routes, out muscle dudes on slants and crossing routes, because even that area of his game was non-existent. He only saw 7 contested catch targets last year. That was the least in the NFL based on, those 37 eligible receivers, he only came down with one of those. So 1 for 7, that was dead last out of 37 in contested catch win rate. He had a sort of min-maxed type of season in that very specific role that ended up leaving him hyper productive. Through the playoffs, he had 1,200 yards, 8 touchdowns. He was a weapon in that type of role. But if he can start to add to his skill set, I do see some version of a Deebo Samuel here in Rashee Rice. He has really proven to be a talented NFL receiver in a way that I never would have imagined based on his college profile. But a credit to Rashee and the Chiefs for locating that and putting it to use on the field. You do have to at least quickly mention that, there's a bit of a ongoing, legal situation with a car crash, right, with Rashee Rice. Not going to speculate on it, but there could be a suspension looming at some point for him. But it does seem like that's going to be more next year and not impact this year's Chiefs team. So should be, at least from a football perspective, good to go there. But then you've got your speed, Hollywood Brown and Xavier Worthy, and it's really hard to not talk about these guys together. I mean, literally my pro comp on Xavier Worthy, as it was, I'm sure, for many people, was Hollywood Brown. So they just have two of these guys. Now, in terms of expectations and what we know about their floor in the NFL, they are a little different. Hollywood Brown, a much more established, proven NFL talent, even though he's had a rough go at it the last couple of years in Arizona, where things just haven't really been conducive to his success as a vertical threat, compared to Xavier Worthy, who, for most teams was probably a second-round type of wide receiver, but for the Chiefs, knowing what they know about how they can utilize this type of speed, that's where you get him into more of the first-round type of conversation. But what I will say is this is such a phenomenal setup for one of or both of these guys to have great years. Like Andy Reid, Mahomes, they know how to use these guys. They did it with Tyreek Hill. Now, these guys aren't overall Tyreek Hill, but they can do the same stuff. They have those plays in the playbook that they used to run when they had Hill and Marquise Brown with those double deep crossers, the play action shots, having a guy run Wasp was the famous route, right, that Tyreek Hill ran in that Super Bowl where he's faking the post, running the corner. It's an uncoverable route for a guy with this type of speed. In the case of Hollywood Brown, especially a guy that does have really quick feet and incredible route running, as it relates to Xavier Worthy. He flashes that type of stuff, but he's just much more younger and unproven, didn't really reach that high-level production in college that you're hoping he can, get as a first-round pick here for the Chiefs. But they've got it all in there. They just haven't been able to run it because of the way teams have been playing them more too high quarter stuff, and because of the, receivers they've had here. Marquez Valdes-Scantling can run a go ball or a post, but he doesn't have the overall deceptive route running that either of these guys are capable of. So just such a perfect fit for both these guys. In terms of where I'm projecting these guys to, how I'm projecting them to play this year, 2 months ago, I was really freaking high on what Hollywood Brown was gonna be here. I had kind of said he was gonna have a 1,500 yards season, a kind of an all-pro caliber year, hit free agency after this year. Then they'd make Xavier Worthy kind of fill in after Hollywood Brown next year as Hollywood Brown got priced out after a monster season. Unfortunately, Hollywood Brown got a shoulder injury. He's going to miss week 1, and he's missed the last 3 weeks of practice or so. And I don't think that derails his season, but I do think it opens the door for Xavier Worthy to really get that opportunity early. Now, that doesn't mean Xavier Worthy is going to just step in and have this monster, ridiculous season as a rookie. I think Hollywood Brown will inevitably eat back into Worthy as soon as he gets back on the football field. But if Worthy shows he can play as early as tonight against the Ravens, and Mahomes likes him out there. Reed likes what he sees. They will just start putting both these guys out there. And then, that maybe massive target share that I had viewed for Hollywood Brown does come down a little bit, and they're just using both of these guys in this insane electric role. And that's best case scenario for the Chiefs, because not only do you have two of these guys, but you're speeding up Xavier Worthy's development path, and you're potentially, as you look down the road, you're potentially making Hollywood Brown a little bit cheaper. If he doesn't have that absurd season and his market stays about what it is now, maybe you do lock him up for a 3-year, $45 million contract, as opposed to him getting $25 million if he has like a Pro Bowl type of year here. So maybe for the Chiefs, that was best long term. But you got to love how these guys' skill sets just work with Kelsey and Rashee Rice eating in the short to intermediate game. And these guys just threatening over the top, producing over the top, but also opening things up for those guys to do work underneath, and for the run game, and for Mahomes to scramble. It's just going to open everything back up here. And really the only thing this team is missing is, do they have the number one wide receiver that if it's 3rd and 7 and you get tight man coverage, do they have the guy that can truly win his matchup, get open for an easy throw for Mahomes? No. You're more so counting on Kelsey, that chemistry with Mahomes, probably getting into scramble drill and doing that if you were to get tight man coverage. Because if there is a weakness on really Rice, Brown, and Worthy, it's, beating press, beating man coverage, and winning in that way. And then beyond that, the reason they're not top 10 yet really is just, these are young players and unproven players still trying to ascend. And in the case of Hollywood Brown, kind of get some of his old magic back. But the group definitely makes sense and should be really fun to watch. Beyond those four, it's just going to be a lot of kind of role targets, role players getting small amounts of targets. Isaiah Pacheco and Samaje Perine, I think, will split reps as the receiving back role. They signed Samaje Perine because he's maybe the best pass protecting running back in the league. Really safe hands, so he'll eat into Pacheco's fantasy work a little bit. But it's a nice backfield. They both can catch the ball. And in the case of Pacheco, he's a really nice screen threat. You should expect to see some Noah Gray. 12 personnel. There's times where they want Kelsey as the slot wide receiver and Gray as the tight end. So, he'll get in the mix. He's a solid player, not a special athlete, but he's been a nice tight end too for them. Jared Wiley, a developmental athlete at tight end. Probably not expecting much from him here in his rookie season, but he theoretically has the potential to be the quote-unquote heir apparent. He's not going to become Travis Kelce, but could he emerge as a athletic starting tight end that can do a lot of the kind of flex stuff that they do with Kelce as a bit of a slot wide receiver? Yeah, he had a lot of athleticism at TCU, just has a lot of stuff to work on. Then you got your wide receiver depth, Sky Moore, Justin Watson. These guys are true backups at this point. Sky Moore as your slot piece. Justin Watson as more of a possession wide receiver. Fine enough as backups at this point. They did bring in Juju Smith-Schuster. I would imagine he'll be their third wide receiver tonight, maybe. When he's healthy, we know he can work within this offense. It's just, does he have any cartilage left in his knee? That's really all we don't know about Juju Smith-Schuster. A very tough player to rank. It made so much sense when they brought him back, though, and at least, in the meantime, while did I say Worthy earlier? I meant Hollywood Brown. While Brown's out tonight, gives you a little bit more of a starting caliber guy. If they get into the playoffs, could he step up? Maybe. I mean, it just made sense to bring him back. And then Mecole, I would only imagine, is here for a special teams role at this point. And that rounds out the weapons here. So they grade out really nice in a league full of weapons, 12th to 18th. Could very well, though, finish top 10, top 8, top 6. Probably starting to push it a little bit given all the dudes in the league right now. But I'm really excited to see where this goes. Really, really excited. Then at running back, they rank out a little bit lower there, 15th to 19th. Isaiah Pacheco is a very, very fun player. He runs hard as hell. He's got a lot of power. He's got good speed. He's a good NFL running back. He's somewhere in the top 15 to 20 for me. I think I think probably does get a little bit overrated because of the spotlight he gets here in Kansas City and the opportunity he's had here. This is a very friendly environment for these running backs because of how they spread things out and because how great the interior of the offensive line is. And in the case of Pacheco, he's 19th in yards per attempt last year, 38th in PFF elusiveness rating, which is your consistency to force missed tackles. 26th in yards after contact is actually probably a lot lower than people would think for a guy that has the highlight runs that he has. And I overall just don't love his vision. He can be a little decommittal at times, second guess himself. He's got some drawbacks as a running back, but he's going to produce within this system. It's not that he's a bad running back by any stretch of the imagination. His physical talent and his intensity alone is enough for him to be a productive back. But I think people will be a little bit surprised that they're not closer to top 10 with Pacheco, because that's really where his total yardage is, maybe where I'd put him as a fantasy running back. But I do think, evaluating the player, there's a little bit missing there. He's still a very good player, though, more than good enough for this team. And then you've got your role players in the backfield. No one special, but Samaje Perine really there as, kind of a quasi fullback in many ways in the way that he's used, because really all he's going to do is pass protect and catch checkdowns. I know that's not really a fullback, but he's not really here to run the football for this team, I don't think. But a nice signing nonetheless, and he allows this team to give Pacheco some breathers on passing downs, because Pacheco was already towards the top of the league in carries last year, and he was their lead receiving back. Split up that workload a little bit with a guy in Perine that honestly is pretty damn similar to Pacheco as a receiving back, but an even better and more reliable pass protector to help out their left tackle questions that we're going to see in a second here. So I do like the signing. And then Clyde Edwards-Helaire will probably resume as their backup runner of the football when he comes back. I think he's on the 1 week non-football injury list. I don't even know what's going on there. I don't think it really makes a big difference. And then Carson Steele, the preseason star, an elite aesthetic here. Hey, I'm open to the idea of Carson Steele getting opportunity and showing off his talent. Didn't watch too much of him at UCLA, but definitely one of the highlights of the preseason. We'll see if those opportunities come for him. And then in terms of the quarterback run multiplier, they get a slight boost. They will randomly mix in a read option or two. This is a inside zone shotgun run game where they want to at least make teams think that they have to account for Mahomes to keep it. It might be once a month, but if that's enough that teams are always holding that backside end, it is going to add a slight multiplier to the run game. So that's reflected here. Overall, it's a good backfield, more than enough for a pass-happy team with good run blocking. You guys will have to let me know if I'm too low on Pacheco. I telling you what my eyes are seeing there. I think there's a lot of good backs in the league, some of which I think would be even more consistent and dynamic than Pacheco in this opportunity. But let's talk about the offensive line. Incredible group with the exception of Kingsley Suamataia at left tackle. Did not think he'd be starting when they drafted him, second round. That's a surprise. But even with that, this comes out tied for my 7th to 8th offensive line overall, in a tier 7th to 15th for pass blocking and 8th to 9th for run blocking. But let's talk about Kingsley at left tackle. This dude was the definition of a raw, traits-based developmental prospect. And the traits are insane. The length, the athleticism, every physical measurable you could look for is there on paper and they're on film. This guy has a little bit of that kind of Jordan Mailata-esque feel about him where it's like, this guy could be really freaking good if the coaching is right and they can get him from a technique standpoint where he needs to be. But he was just an athlete out there in, what is the Mountain West Conference, like not really going against great level of competition. And even then, like he had his losses for sure, really in both phases. Had some bad reps, but when he connected as a run blocker, it was really a thing of beauty. And I think, you can feel better about his run blocking in his rookie season than his pass blocking. He does want it. He checks that box. Some of these freaks at this position just can play a little bit softer. That's not the case with Kingsley Suamataia. He absolutely wants to enforce his traits upon the defense. But yeah, from a pass protect standpoint, it's like from his feet to his head, it all needs to be reworked. And just not even reworked, just built from the ground up. This team has earned the benefit of the doubt, and it's kind of interesting that the Chiefs are just like, you know what? Let's just throw him out there. Trial by fire. Let's expedite his development as much as possible. This probably isn't a position like quarterback where you'll like destroy a dude's confidence. Depending on the guy's mental toughness, that may or may not happen. But probably a position that, the more times you lose, the more you learn from it. Maybe he sucks in week 1, but by week 15, heading into the playoffs, he's okay. And then heading into year 2, you already know what you're getting instead of just sitting him and heading into next offseason, like no idea what your left tackle is going to look like. As a long-term play, it does make sense, but does it make me worried with him going out there week 1 here tonight? He'll be a guy to keep an eye on for sure. I kind of think it's going to work eventually, but like I said, probably some hiccups early on, and definitely drags this otherwise pretty special group down. The one thing I will say before we talk about the interior guys here is the Chiefs clearly understand Mahomes' skill set, and it definitely makes sense why they would focus on the interior of the offensive line being secure over the tackle group. Not that they don't want to give him good tackles, but Mahomes, number one, he hurts his offensive tackles oftentimes with how far back he drops in the pocket. He's gotten better at this over the years, but he'll still do it occasionally. And essentially, if he drops way back, there's nothing a tackle can do. Their job is to seal that edge and then protect the pocket. But these freaky athletic edge rushers running forward are eventually just going to win that angle if Mahomes creates it for him by dropping back. So there's that. But also Mahomes is so good and twitchy to step up into the pocket and extend plays with his feet. So if you give him those step-up lanes, he'll invite that pressure. And it's almost like, teams teach these rushers, don't go past the quarterback. Like that's a lot of, the emphasis from these coaches is do not go past the quarterback, because that's where those escape lanes come out, and a guy like Mahomes can kill you. Well, when he's dropping back in the pocket like that and your tackles are losing, these edge rushers are just too damn tempted to just try and, go find Mahomes. But Mahomes will then step up and still win that angle for the tackle eventually. It can be a dangerous world to live in. Like when they played Denver last year against Nick Bonito and Baron Browning, are like two of the freakiest edge rushers in the league. They were able to turn that corner and get to Mahomes. But for the most part, like they understand, like Mahomes' play style does allow them to have worse tackle play as long as the interior is there and they're not allowing interior pressure. So that allows them, again, to roll the dice with a Suamataia out there. But they absolutely have the interior offensive line to allow that. I would say this is the best interior O-line in the league. Left guard Joe Thuney, I think the best pass protecting tackle in the league. A tackle background coming out of college, but has just been a dominant, consistent guard. Such a great signing to get him from New England. He's been an absolute rock since they got him. He's not the most remarkable athlete or people mover in the run game, but he's got the right technique and toughness in that phase as well. And then you've got your center, Creed Humphrey, just got a massive contract. Talk about a rock. I mean, this dude is built like a refrigerator. His play strength, his tenacity is insane. One of the best, if not the best, just raw people movers for the centers in the league. A lot of the centers in the league right now, too, are 300-pound athlete types. Creed he's got an anchor, man. He doesn't go backwards. He's a solid 315, 320 pounds. And that doesn't just show up as a pass protector. In this run scheme, he's perfect because, it's a lot of inside zone or a lot of power out of shotgun where he just has to either combo block, drive a nose tackle back, or in power, he's got to, cement himself as that pivot point in the A gap and not get pushed back into the B gap that can blow up a gap run. He's perfect for this team, for this system. He's got a great targeting system on screens too. Really fun player. still to this day and will forever pain me as a Packers fan that Gutekunst took Josh Myers, the pick before Creed Humphrey. Chiefs fans, I am the definition of jealousy. Then Trey Smith at right guard. This one's on the NFL, man. Anybody could have taken Trey Smith before letting the Chiefs get him. But he falls to the 6th round over, heart murmur concerns, not to dismiss that as not being serious. But once you get past the 4th round on a dude that clearly had 2nd round tape, why the hell would you not take a gamble on this guy? The Chiefs did, and he's barely missed any time. He's a great athlete. He really has developed his technique. He struggled as a pass protector coming into the league, but he's a good one now and probably only getting better. I actually put the up arrow on Trey Smith, and he is definitely due for a payday here. We'll see if the Chiefs can fit him in under the books after they just paid Creed Humphrey. It might happen. We just saw, we've seen a lot of guards getting paid this offseason. So he's probably next up, going to get 20, 21 million, well worth it. And he himself, man, if he takes another leap in pass protection, he might be in the convo for like the best guard in the NFL, which is a pretty big debate right now. There's not like a clear-cut king at the position. I think Thuney's up there, but Trey Smith could get there too. So and Creed Humphrey, by the way, I would say is tied with Frank Ragnow for the best center in the league. So there's a world where this year they have 2 top 5 guards and the best center in the league. It's pretty crazy, but it's also crazy that they only rank 7th to 8th for offensive line, given their tackle questions. And that does continue at right tackle. Jawan Taylor is fine. He is overpaid at this point, and I had a short last year where I actually said that the NFL kind of screwed the Chiefs, and my point is like nobody gives a shit. Like, everybody's waiting on the Chiefs' downfall. But the Chiefs did sign Jawan Taylor based on his tape in Jacksonville, where he cheated the rules or pushed the rules to the best of his ability, essentially in terms of jumping the snap. Like, he did that in Jacksonville all the time. He would get started on that kick slide a little bit early. The second the Chiefs signed him, though, and after the first game of the year against the Lions, everybody's complaining about it. Obviously a spotlight that wasn't there in Jacksonville. And all of a sudden the league's like, yeah, we're going to start calling that. And almost immediately, Jawan Taylor is getting flagged left and right. They're pulling him off the field. They have to rework his game. He has to kind of redevelop, kind of take a step back before he can take a step forward as a pass protector, where he was already like good but not amazing. And he ends up leading the league in penalties last year. Really had a rough year, but I do think as the year went on and he readjusted to what was going on, he settled back in as like a pretty good to solid pass protector. Still probably in the bottom half of the league for pass protecting right tackles, and in the bottom, 40 to 60 tackles in the league. So he's certainly not a great player, and especially because as a run blocker, he is pedestrian. Always has been. He doesn't really have that tenacity. I don't think he has great play strength. Like, when he does lose as a pass blocker, it's often power as well. So, I think the Chiefs are kind of looking for the first way out of this Jawan Taylor contract. It's a big reason why they probably felt the need to start Kingsley Suamataia, because they need to know who some of their future answers are here. I don't think that's Jawan Taylor, but he did do a nice enough job to, settle back in and be like, okay, as the year went on. And then also their depth is really shaky. You have Wanya Morris, who I assumed was going to get the starting job here. It's frankly concerning that he didn't. He was a 3rd-round pick out of Oklahoma. Did have the traits, but hard to count on seeing too much from him. And then the Ethan Driscoll undrafted pickup as tackle depth. I will say I love Hunter Nauerzad. Love him. Was on him really early in the draft process, and I noticed like pretty much everybody, not every draft analyst is going 150, 200 players deep, getting into day 3 interior offensive linemen. But I think all of the ones that did saw the same thing I did. I just happened to see him earlier because I did him while I evaluated Olu at left tackle. So I just did that whole offensive line together, and he was one of the first players I watched in the draft, and he was my first like deep sleeper tweet that I had. And of course, the Chiefs end up getting him. Not like they've ever stolen dudes in the draft that become really good players. He's so balanced. He's tough. He's athletic. I think he can block any system. I think he could absolutely be a starter someday for the Chiefs if they can't afford Trey Smith. But that's the thing, is that opportunity going to come for him? I don't know. It could be a long time until we see Hunter Nauerzad. But I think if nothing else, he plugs right into that Nick Allegretti spot where he was very capable depth, actually played well in the final 2 games of the season when Tooney went out. I think he was a really good pick to fill that hole. And then Mike Caliendo, CJ Hansen, a 7th-round pick, much less proven there. It is worth noting they actually have one of the worst group of run-blocking skill players. They are tied for last there. That group actually reduces their overall run-blocking grade by 1%. Because their tight ends don't really block. The receivers don't really block. It's just not really a priority for this team, which is fine. That's typical in this Andy Reid tree, right? Because these guys are spread out. You're not running as much 12 personnel. Kind of makes sense, right? But I do have the Chiefs as my number 1 offense this year. I do think the explosiveness with the weapons is going to be really, really fun. I think we do see more of a Patrick Mahomes type of MVP season and kind of get back to seeing the Chiefs looking like the old Chiefs that we knew and love. And in terms of the splits, they are first in passing game, but 11th in overall run game, where kind of like they've been. Like, I think they will be efficient when they want to run the ball. They're maybe like their EPA added on runs might be pretty damn good, but total rushing yards, they might be in the bottom 12 this year because I think they're going to air it out a lot more. But that's not to say that this team doesn't have a defense. They very much did last year. And if they can be, close to what they were last year, things can get pretty scary here if the offense is more explosive. But let's go through this unit. We'll start with the defensive line. It's a very similar, familiar group. Effectively the same exact bodies that we were talking about last year. And honestly, my opinions on all these players has hardly changed. Honestly, after last year, I think this group pretty much played up to expectations, where you have Chris Jones now taking over as the best interior pass rusher in the league. I don't even think that's a debate right now. A guy that absolutely demands double teams. They move him all over the formation. They can rush him from the edge. They'll get him going on stunts. They move him around too to make sure he can get one-on-ones. They'll blitz to make sure he gets one-on-ones. But as you'll see, their overall pass rush grade just ranks 12th to 13th for me, which is still obviously very good when you have one of the best pass rushers in the league. But I do wish they had someone else that could capitalize on the fact that teams are always going to double and slide towards Chris Jones. I really don't think they have a guy that's going to crush one-on-one opportunities. And that takes me to George Karlaftis. Thanks to NFL Pro, I can now go in about 20 minutes and watch all of a guy's pressures. And I wanted to do that with George Karlaftis because in this era of, PFF and PFF grades, Karlaftis had double-digit sacks, 83 pressures on the season, which actually did put him 9th in the NFL for edge rushers, but a 65 PFF pass rushing grade. And his pass rushing win rate, talk about the ability to win those one-on-one reps that Chris Jones can create, 59th out of 116. Not bad, but certainly not great, and certainly doesn't scream awesome number 2 that's going to kill you if you leave him one-on-one. So I wanted to watch the film, and thanks to NFL Pro, we can do that. And honestly, I agree with PFF on this one. A shit ton of those pressures, I didn't chart it myself, but a lot of them were stunts and cleanup pursuit pressures, where either the quarterback's rolling out and he's running him down, or someone else is pushing the quarterback into George Karlaftis. And I ultimately actually ended up walking away feeling worse about George Karlaftis than I did when I put these rankings together in May. Add on top of the fact that I kind of forgot that Charles Omenihu had torn his ACL in the AFC Championship, who's their next best pass rusher, and I actually knocked the Chiefs down a little bit to join the Lions for that pass rushing ranking, 12th to 13th. So just a little behind the scenes there, and that's a good spot to tell you guys too. I am publishing now my full rankings for the series, all the team splits and positional rankings and all that. Was waiting for this final episode to post that. So it is available free on my Patreon. If while you're over there, if you want to support the channel and you want to sign up, you can get access to my weekly NFL picks, picking games against the spread, keeping track of my record, doing so, trying to make some money this year. That's a weekly exclusive benefit on Patreon. If you want to support the channel while you're over there, I really do appreciate it. But the rankings are published for free there. But back to Karlaftis for a second. I do think he's a good player. I think he's ultimately still a low-end number 2. That's not to say he doesn't win one-on-one reps, because he does. He has a bag of tricks. He wins with speed, bend. He's got decent power. I wish he had a little bit more power. He's got good swipes. He's got counters. He's an effective overall player. Ideally, he'd be a 3, or maybe you can live with it if he's a 2B when Charles Omenihu comes back, right? And you have your 1 and then a pair of 2Bs in Charles Omenihu, maybe. But, I actually didn't put the up arrow on George Karlaftis. For one, I just don't think he's going to repeat the production he got last year. I do think it was a lot of flukiness and schemed up stuff. And I also just don't know quite how much more he can advance his technique when he's just not the most overall toolsy player. And when I had Karlaftis coming out, I was higher on him coming out. I thought he was going to settle in as like a starting number 2 edge rusher, and that's about where he's at now. So I don't think we need to necessarily project the up arrow on every young player in the league. I think he had a good year. I think he can be something like that again, but I'm not expecting him to take some leap forward and be this awesome compliment to Chris Jones. Chiefs fans will have to, lay into me on that one. I'm just telling you what I saw. I took the time. I watched every single pressure. I've always liked Karlaftis, but I did walk away a little bit underwhelmed by the film on him. But that is why it's so important that Charles Omenihu can get back at full speed. It just throws a wrinkle into this. Last year Omenihu was suspended. You knew he was going to be gone for 6 weeks. You knew exactly when he was going to come back, and you figured he would be full go when back. Omenihu, you don't know necessarily when he's going to be back. You assume it'll be probably mid-October, early November, but you don't know if he's going to be 100%. This is a position that depends on explosiveness, firing out of that three-point stance, being that disruptive player that Omenihu is. And when he's back, and if he can be full speed, which again is a bit of a question mark here, you do bump this pass rush up. You feel much better about it, and it would be probably closer to top 10 if you could guarantee me Omenihu comes back 100%. So they're right on the cusp of being like very good, but I do have currently some questions for a team that is ranked number 1 and obviously has Super Bowl expectations. These little mini nuanced discussions, I think, can make the difference between being the best team in the league and the 4th best team in the league as the season goes on. Now, there is one other player, and I think just one other player that could compensate for Omenihu if he doesn't come back in the way that we need to see him, and that is FAU, Felix Anudike-Uzomah. But talk about a guy whose film was underwhelming. Yikes, man. I wanted to see it so bad with Anudike-Uzomah, but I don't know how you have like any positive takeaways from his rookie season. And I don't want to be overly negative here, but like I already thought he was overdrafted in the first round. He just wasn't a very traitsy rusher. He really won with leverage and effort and a rip move. He was a strong, intense player coming out, and I had a second round grade on him. I thought he was a bit of a reach, but someone that could maybe become a starter in the league. But returning first round dividends did already seem like a reach, and I feel worse about him now after watching him from last year. The thing is, it's not like he was hurt. He played in every game, or at least 18 games. but he was just getting stonewalled every pass rush snap seemingly. He had 11 pressures, 1 sack on 153 snaps. And that PFF pass rush grade of 52.0, I think absolutely shows on film. And for him, I hate to be overly negative here, and he's a fun player, seems like a really good dude. I want to be wrong about this, but I just have a hard time seeing the path for this to get much better. Not only is he still buried behind Mike Dana on the depth chart, I think they will rotate him to get him those snaps, but just looking at his skill set, I just don't necessarily, if what he did in college isn't going to work in the pros, where he's firing off the ball, trying to get low, rip through, win with core balance and leverage, I don't really see what he's going to be able to add to that profile to get something that really works in the league, because I don't think he has really an explosive, lengthy power rushing profile. I don't think he has the quickness and speed to have speed to bend, finesse profile. I'm really worried, man, that he is going to settle in as like a Shaq Lawson, a Taco Charlton, a guy that got just overdrafted in the first round, settles in as a rotational defensive end, can do a little bit of run defense, a little bit of pass rushing, but is never efficient enough to be anything. Man, I really hope I'm wrong, but I'm just being honest. That's kind of where I'm at with FAU currently after watching the film. But he does have that first round pedigree, and maybe can change my stance on that. But we do still have 2 starters to talk about here. You got Mike Dana, who's a physical run defender, no pass rush profile really at all. He wins on some stunts and effort rushes and stuff. Not a player you want starting at all. You want him as a third guy off the bench, a spark plug, but he's going to have to play a lot of snaps here. And then you've got a kind of rotation with your starting defensive tackle, Derek Noddy, who was miserable in the regular season and then kind of turned it on down the stretch. And this is a team that has a couple of players like that. There's another one in Mike Pennell, where, this team is kind of coasting in the regular season. And for a Derek Noddy, does he really want to dig in and 2-gap and take on double teams all season long? Probably not. I think you can very, very much question the sort of consistency and effort from a Derek Noddy, because when he tries, when the playoffs start, he starts to defend the run, and he was pretty good in the playoffs last year. So how do you rank a player like that contributed to the Chiefs being one of the worst run defenses in the league last year? It's tough, really tough. But he will come off the field for Tershawn Wharton on passing downs, because Noddy, even in the playoffs, doesn't have a pass rushing profile at all. He's a run defense player. Wharton is that typical undersized speed rushing defensive tackle. You don't want him getting caught out there on run downs, but he can get after the quarterback a little bit. He can split gaps and be a weapon on stunts. He's a decent enough piece as a rotational rusher. Pennell, we kind of alluded to it, but he's here to play in the playoffs, basically. Not someone that you can really count on in the regular season to eat up snaps. I'm going to kind of debut the half empty, half full battery that was the suggestion from guys that have stamina questions. We'll be seeing that a lot more in the series next year. And then Marlon Tuipulotu never amounted to anything for the Eagles. They did go and get Cameron Thomas as we kick back out to the edge depth. Man, I almost like Cam Thomas more than FAU. Wouldn't be surprised if he outsnaps him. Interesting player where he's just not an athlete, kind of a tweener at times, but he's got quick feet, good technique, a balanced player. Kind of another Mike Dana in many ways. I think it was a nice move to go get him until Amenihu can come back. Malik Herring is another kind of thumper out of Georgia. And then they do have the developmental B.J. Thompson currently on the NFI list. Anything you get from him is house money. He was always a dart throw in the draft. So I know we had a bit of a negative conversation with this defensive line. They're not going to suck when you have Chris Jones. He just is such a good player in his own right and has a force multiplying effect. that really worked for this team last year and should work for them again. I don't want to be overly negative, but do I wish they had a little bit more to have a little bit more of a fear factor on this defensive line? And am I a little bit worried that if teams can have a game plan for Chris Jones, that, with a secondary now without L'Jarius Sneed, if you're putting a little bit too much pressure on that secondary, if you're trying to poke holes in the Chiefs, I think this defensive line is a starting point for doing that. And that's just more from a pass rushing lens. From a run defense perspective, this was a problem for this team last season. But it does become a much more unique conversation because they've built this in a way that seemingly these guys will step up in the playoffs, similar to how they, have kind of done for a couple of years. It feels like, especially last year. But even Chris Jones isn't an elite run defender. He's very good at it. But beyond him, it's like, man, it is squishy. You can absolutely run at these dudes. But as we move on, not so much a group to poke holes in. And with the linebackers, I think this is a phenomenal group. You got like 3 guys I like that all have a perfect role here for their skill sets. So you got Nick Bolton. Big year for Nick Bolton in terms of his future on this Chiefs team. They can't pay everybody, as we've seen. He's heading into a contract year as a second-round pick 3 years ago and had a down year last year because of injuries. He just, I think, struggled to get to 100%. He missed a lot of time. And I think was kind of maybe rushed back a little bit. Like, he just was not as efficient as he was in 2022. So I think getting him back healthy should be kind of resuming his hype from last year. And heading into a contract year, there's no reason to believe Nick Bolton can't play like a overall top 10 linebacker in the league. And for that reason, I put the up arrow on him. I mean, he's an undeniably good run defender. He's got the play strength, the tenacity, the IQ in that phase. But he has really impressed as a coverage player, too. He's really heady, feels out zone windows in a way that I never saw from him at Missouri. So he's been really impressive there. Not the most, fluid or rangiest coverage player, but definitely compensates for that. Kind of reminds me of TJ Edwards a little bit, at least as a coverage player. But overall, there's a lot of TJ Edwards to his game, and that's a huge compliment for those that heard what I said about TJ Edwards in the Bears deep dive. But yeah, he's heading towards a pretty big payday somewhere, whether it's here or somewhere else. And that might be somewhere else because they have 2 other guys here that can absolutely play. Drew Tranquill, they did extend him. It was a little bit of a surprise that they brought him back, but after watching the film on the Chiefs, I get it much more. I do think if you're talking about my hype on Leo Chenal, I was a little bit bummed because I was like, oh, Willie Gay's gone, Tranquill's a free agent. We get to see Leo Chenal as a number 2 linebacker. As long as you have Nick Bolton here, Chenal doesn't really make sense next to him because Chenal's also kind of just that smashing run defend first player. Tranquill is a more nuanced, athletic, versatile player than I think I have given him credit for over the years. He was really impressive last year, stood out to me on film, to the point that I would actually say run defense is the lowest of his strengths. I think he's a nice coverage player. He has the IQ. He's got speed. He's got pretty oily hips for the position. He's not the most insane athlete or anything, but he can open up and cover some range back there. And then he's an awesome blitzer, man. He's so good at timing the snap, just blitzes with his hair on fire, and they weaponize him that way too. So he's a really nice balanced player. When they signed him, I questioned it, but watching the Chiefs film back for this deep dive, I get it. He definitely plays a role that Leo Chenal certainly isn't quite ready to do, at least, and maybe never will be. Chenal, though, is one of my favorite players in the league that's like kind of gets that like free this man tag. Like, I'm just waiting on that opportunity to come for him. He was my number 2 linebacker in that draft class that had Quay Walker and Chad Muma. Devin Lloyd was my number 1 guy. And I would say to this point, he has been the second best linebacker from that draft class. His film is better than Quay Walker's film. It's better than Chad Muma's film. Nakobe Dean, any of those guys in that draft class. The thing is, he just hasn't had too much of an opportunity because he's had these 2 guys here and Willie Gay has been here. So he's been kind of playing a backup strong side linebacker role. And he's even played like a decent amount of like edge, like linebacker for this team, but they do move him around. And he is just as fun as he was at Wisconsin. His game is translating. Like, I really do believe Leo Chenal someday has a good chance to be a top 5 run defender in the league. It reminds me a lot of Demario Davis, just his size, his first step, his willingness to hit, how good he is as a blitzer. He hasn't been in a spot, though, here or even at Wisconsin, they didn't ask him too much to cover. But he just hasn't been in a spot where he can kind of develop and show what he has in coverage. But his sideline-to-sideline speed in a straight line is awesome. So he'll be back as a, third linebacker. He'll get his 400 snaps or so. The thing about Chenal is, like, I don't know if they win the Super Bowl against the Eagles without him. When he's out there, he is a huge impact in the run defense. So he's a real asset to have as a third linebacker. And I do think, if they're talking about like, okay, is it Trey Smith or is it Nick Bolton? You probably pick Trey Smith and count on Leo Chenal to fill in as the thumper next to Nick Bolton next year. And that could be, he would be one of my breakout players of all time if that happens. They are lacking depth after that. Jock Cochran, who's played a little bit, and Cam Jones made some plays at Indiana, but they hopefully shouldn't need to go to those guys, because if one guy goes down, Leo Chenal should be able to step in. Overall, they get a top 10 grade for me, 9th to 10th overall. They're 10th to 19th in coverage. While we praised Bolton and Tranquil for their coverage, neither of them are like sensational cover players. They're just very good. And then from a run defense perspective, they are more top 10, 3rd to 11th. Definitely an overall strength of this defense. But then our last position group here, the secondary, definitely some volatility getting brought into the mix here. Anytime you're getting rid of a top 10 cornerback, that's going to happen. But still a very good unit. They come out. Again, I feel like our last 3 or 4 secondaries have been in this group of like really solid secondaries with a piece or two that are question marks, that if those questions land on the right side of the coin, it's a top 10 secondary in the league. The Chiefs are right in there. Yeah, I think the Niners, the Lions, and the Eagles, our last 3 teams, were all right in this tier. And it makes sense again for the Chiefs. You have your rock in Trent McDuffie, and then kind of couple solid safeties and some question marks with the remaining corners. But I do want to give Trent McDuffie his flowers. I tweeted this a few weeks ago, and people were panicking because they thought the Chiefs were going to come out like number 6 in the power rankings or whatever. It stemmed from when I was watching the Ravens and AFC Championship game against the Chiefs. But I don't even think I've given Trent McDuffie enough credit. I think I have probably overall, but throughout the course of this series, I've been discussing who the best slot corner in the NFL is. And, when Trent McDuffie is playing slot corner, he is the best slot corner in the NFL. But they do play him as a slot corner 70% of the time. When they're in nickel, he is their slot corner. So I've been saying Brian Branch, Mike Hilton, Kenny Moore. Those guys are the best true slot corners in the league. But if you're saying who's the best corner as a slot corner that does play a lot of slot, that would be Trent McDuffie. His stickiness in coverage is absurd. And it is hard to do that from the slot. Defending two-way goes, defending crossing routes, slot fades. And you have to be able to, week to week, you have to be able to handle some big receivers. You have to handle some really quick route running types of wide receivers. There's a larger variety of body types that you face at that position. It's just tough, man. And his combination of reaction time, whether it's man coverage or zone, the foot speed, the stickiness, the route squeeze, the physicality at the catch point. He's awesome. Reminds me a lot of Jair Alexander. Maybe not quite as fast, but he's got very similar in the way he moves and reacts to route breaks and stuff. And I do put the up arrow on Trent McDuffie. If he kind of cemented himself as a top 3 corner in the NFL this year, kind of I guess, taking the crown in Kansas City, because I think really until like the last 6 weeks of last season, when people were really starting to realize how good this dude is in year 2 last year, I think he's mostly been under the umbrella of L'Jarius Sneed, right? I think that could change this year. So he could even be like a on breakout watch of sorts. But if he's just as good as he was last year, he's a legit number one, and his flexibility is insane to bounce inside and out. So if they want to run base defense when Leo Chanel's in there, which they do run base a good bit, Trent will be the outside corner, and then when they get in a nickel, he'll slide in. And then these two corners, Jalen Watson and Joshua Williams, continue to just be in this constant competition. They will both play a ton now with L'Jarius Sneed gone, and when they're in nickel, these guys are both starters, but they're kind of in a competition for who's the starter in base, and it might not matter. They might just continue to rotate these guys until it becomes clear who should be playing. But for 2 years, that has not become clear. They both came in as day 3 draft picks, both like identical physical profiles, that same kind of archetype they look for, that 6 foot lengthy physical frame. They kind of double dipped on both these guys, and they kind of hit on both these guys. Both have been relatively unproven because they've been rotating as CB3 on this team. But both Watson and Williams have stepped up, and ultimately both these guys looking good in a quasi-starting role / quasi-backup role. Both of these guys looking as good as they have is the reason they were comfortable to move on from L'Jarius Sneed. So there's literally no reason to believe that these guys can't come in as a pair of lengthy, physical outside corners. This team has cranked these types out, from Charvarius Ward to L'Jarius Sneed. Neither of these guys have the speed of L'Jarius Sneed, but Charvarius Ward is probably a very good comparison for both of these guys, just these smashers as outside corners. So I like both of them a lot. I know we just compared him to Charvarius Ward, who's a legit number 1 corner. I'm not sure they'll reach the consistency of a Ward. I'm not saying they can't either, but I'm also not really too worried about the floor here. They might not get quite the consistency or the plays on the ball that you got from a Sneed, but I don't look at this trio of corners and say, oh my God, the Chiefs are just going to get picked on week in, week out. And I think both Watson and Williams have a good bit still to prove as more starters now. And they clearly believe in these guys because they only have one other true corner on the roster, and it's a 7th round pick last year, Najee Johnson, who's more of a slot archetype that didn't play last year. I wouldn't be surprised if they are waiting to add another piece here, but this team that has earned the absolute benefit of the doubt with the secondary, they have hit on almost every investment they've made at this position group, many of which being small investments. For them to show this much confidence in these guys, to trade away Sneed and then not support them really at all in terms of depth, you feel pretty good about how these guys are going to play this year. I think if you're a Chiefs fan, you can trust it. And then in terms of safeties, you got Justin Reed, who's a good, balanced overall safety. He's got the range to play the single high post. He can man up tight ends. He loves to come downfield and hit. He's got good ball skills. He has his inconsistencies as a tackler and overall run defender, and he's not the most consistent, dynamic coverage player either, but he's a really good starting safety. Good enough that if he's your best safety, I'm cool with that. Honestly, the biggest question for me is probably Brian Cook. I just worry about his overall athleticism at the position. I just think he's very capped. He's a smart player, loves to hit. I don't think he sucks, but his lack of twitch and athleticism on the back end does reduce his margin for error, and I just think he's a guy you can kind of pick on if you find a way to get him isolated one-on-one. As your weakest link, you'll live with it. He's not going to bust a lot of coverages and give up huge plays, but you could probably do better there. And honestly, Shamari Connor, if he keeps looking as good as he did last year, he might take this job from Brian Cook. I know they like Brian Cook internally, Must be a really solid dude, a good leader, and consistent off-field type of guy. But Connor was explosive, man. He played kind of a nickel corner role at Virginia Tech and has kind of that aggressive, jump everything mentality. Like, he can get beat by double moves if you're playing him top down. Like, he'll jump it, and then guys will burn him over the top. But that does, more often than not, put him in playmaking situations. And, like, he's got the length, the speed, the twitch to be, like, a good coverage player and man dudes up as well. I like him, and at least for where he's at now in the Mike Edwards role for this defense, which is the perfect spot for a guy like this that wants to be a ball hawk, jump routes, be aggressive, but you're putting him in a coverage assignment where he's got help over the top, and if he does overcommit, it's not going to lead to these back-breaking plays. Love him in that role. He's a guy that might play 400 snaps this year and have 4 picks. But also, he's young. If he continues to kind of find that balance in terms of aggressiveness, I think he could, overtake either Reed or Brian Cook someday as a starter. He really looks the part to me. And then they have Jaden Hicks as well. I mean, look, I thought Jaden Hicks was a better prospect coming out than Brian Cook. I think he brings the same sort of physicality, the strong safety archetype, but he's a little bigger than Brian Cook and definitely faster than Brian Cook too. So probably not going to play too much this year, but he's going to be a really good special teamer, loves to hit, and I wouldn't be surprised if he becomes a starter here someday either. And then Chris Roland Wallace, who I didn't watch, also made the team. Seems to have kind of a similar hybrid defensive back build as someone like Shamari Connor. But it's a good secondary, depending just how big of steps Jalen Watson and Josh Williams take as full-time starters. You're looking at a kind of high floor, top 16 or so secondary that could be top 10 or so. Again, depending on how those corners play out. But as we wrap up the defense, they came out as my 8th overall defense, 7th in pass defense, and much worse in run defense. So pretty similar to last year's defense, just without L'Jarius Sneed. It kind of adds up. It makes sense. They were much better as a pass defense last year than a run defense. But if they take a slight step back, which this would be a slight step back, right? They were, 7th in DVOA last year. So a very slight step back, but, gives them a little bit, I would say, more margin for error, maybe. Last year, they certainly weren't Super Bowl favorites heading into the postseason. I think if they're similar to where they were defensively, again, maybe a little bit worse, but much more dynamic and explosive on offense, where this year we have them as the number 1 ranked offense, as opposed to last year where they were 8th offensively. They could theoretically be putting themselves in an even better position to win the Super Bowl this year than they were at least heading into the postseason last year. And then, of course, the special teams. The Chiefs' completeness is fully rounded out here. They come in as my 5th ranked special teams. Harrison Butker bounced back as one of the best kickers in football last year after a down year in 2022, expecting another great year from him, despite the fact that he is going to lead the league in boo birds this year. He did not make a lot of fans, especially with the female NFL crowd, over his comments at a graduation speech this summer. And then, as if things couldn't get any more controversial there, they bring in Matt Ariza, punt god, as their punter. I really don't have the energy at this point to get into it. He had some sexual assault accusations around the time he got drafted by the Bills, was one of the more hyped up punters I can remember, and then the Bills let him go, but then it kind of came out that he wasn't found guilty. I will let you guys come to your own conclusions on that, but he is replacing Tommy Townsend, who's been a very good punter here for them. Ariza will come into the year ranking pretty low because we haven't seen him really in the NFL, but definitely upside for him to be even better than we're ranking him here, and I guess the special teams to be even higher than 5th, but obviously plenty good enough, and you feel very good about them on that side of the ball, not just the kicker, punter, but their overall special teams consistency has been very solid for this team. But let's continue to wrap things up. Take a look at the Venn diagram of strengths, weaknesses, and pivotal factors. we've hit on the strengths. I'll let you guys just read the chart there if you want more of that. But in terms of the weaknesses, I will say D-line run defense, at least in the regular season. Once the playoffs start, if you get Nadi and Pennell to step up, it's less of a weakness, kind of like we saw last year. But the wild cards there, these are kind of the things that I think will ultimately determine if the Chiefs can win the Super Bowl or not. And it's all these young players. Kingsley Suamataia at left tackle. What does he look like out the gate? What does his growth look like? And then the weapons, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood. What level of consistency do you get from those guys? And then the corners, who we've just hammered home. So this team absolutely has their strengths, but I do think their lack of weaknesses, their provenness as a team, and just how high their floor is as a team, and how balanced they are on, in all three phases, offense, defense, special teams. Pair that with the fact that they have by far the best quarterback in the NFL. It certainly makes sense how the team comes out number one in the power rankings heading into the season and ultimately Super Bowl favorites. But our very last segment here before we say our goodbyes on this 2024 Deep Dive series, the Chiefs' schedule. So they drew the NFC South, nice, but they did draw the AFC North. So that probably evens out and puts them kind of in the middle, but then it leans more towards being an easy schedule because their own division sucks. I mean, the only reason the AFC West is good is because the Chiefs are in it, and they don't have to play the Chiefs. So there's a lot of very winnable games on their schedule. They will be heavy favorites in, by my math, 6 games. Big favorites in 6 games. That alone puts them around 12. You expect some upsets in there, though. But then, you got to win your games at Cleveland, at Buffalo, hosting the Ravens tonight, the Bengals, where they're still going to be favorites, but those are much closer to like 50-50 types of games. And then only one game where they won't be favored in, I think, and that is at San Francisco week 7. But very much screams 12, 13, 14 wins. Vegas knows that. Their over-under is 11.5 wins, and their floor is so nice. Like, really the one position that might be bad on this team is left tackle, and it's not that doesn't matter, but like their other question marks are weaponry and cornerbacks that I think have already shown a nice floor. So it's pretty easy to feel good about the Chiefs ranking number 1 heading into the year. Now, do they have the upside of other teams? The overall roster talent? Maybe not. But as we finish up, I don't think anybody's going to argue with this ranking. I just want to say one more time, thank you so much, everybody. Whether this was the only deep dive you watched and you're still sticking this out to the end, or you binged all, 70 hours of this series. It's been a lot, man, but it's been an absolute joy. Wouldn't trade it for the world. So thankful for you guys. Such a great community here on YouTube. And thank you for watching. I will see you guys very soon for my predictions show. And I'll see Patreon gang. I will see you guys on Saturday for my week 1 Vegas picks. I'll have a text post for tonight's game and tomorrow's game there. And then beyond that, I'll see the rest of you on Tuesday for the power rankings. So make sure you're subscribed. You can check out the Patreon if you want to support the channel, get the exclusive content there, and hit that like button on the way out. But thank you for watching. We'll see you soon.